This video will cover questions 1 through 3 on the quadratics test review. So number 1 is talking about vertical motion, and the graph is given to you, and this will be also on the test. The graph will be given to you since no calculator will be used. So the height of a rocket is launched upward and is modeled by the equation -16t squared plus 96. So we're looking for 3 things. We're looking for the maximum height, the time that occurs, and then the time when the rocket lands. This is really just asking about those important parts of a graph, which are really the vertex and the x-intercepts. So the maximum height is pretty easy to see. So the time that it occurs is 5 seconds. That's actually part B. And then the maximum height that it reaches is going to be 400 feet. Very, very easy question. No one should miss that. And then the time when the rocket lands is when it reaches the ground. So that has a height of 0. So that is going to be at 10 seconds. All right, for number 2, the question asks to find the y-intercept. Remember, it does not matter what format, what type of equation. The y-intercept's always the same thing, and that's when x equals 0. So all you have to do is plug in 0 for x. So for the first one, when I plug in 0, actually this one's quite easy because the 4x squared goes away to 0, 3x goes away to 0, so you're just left with y equals 5. Now, if you leave it as just 5, I will take off a point because I want you to express your answer as a point. The y-intercept is a point, not just one number. So you have to write parentheses 0, 5. That would be the answer. All right, so for B, you can't simply just cross off things. You actually have to plug in 0 here. So we have -3, and then 0 minus 1, and 0 plus 1. I'm showing a little more work than I normally would. Normally I would just go 0 minus 1 is -1, 0 minus 1 plus 4 is 4, and just go straight to that step. Then multiply across. You have a negative times a negative, which would become a positive, and 3 times 4 is 12. And again, we want to write that as the point 0, 12. All right, now on the part C, please do not make the mistake of saying that the y-intercept is just what's sitting at the end as -7. That is incorrect. Okay, so you notice that this form is in vertex form. So again, we're going to plug in 0 for our x. So we have 1/2. 0 plus 4 is just 4 squared minus 7. Now, please watch your PEMDAS here. This is 1/2 times 4 squared, which is 16, then minus 7. So do not do 16 minus 7 here. You're taking 1/2 of 16, which is 8, then minus 7, which is 1. So the y-intercept here is 0, 1. Okay, now for question 3 is asking for the x-intercepts. This one's a little bit trickier than the y-intercepts. Now, x-intercepts does mean that that's when y equals 0. And notice that in part A and part B, those are both in factored form. And remember, factored form tells us the x-intercepts, those roots. C, however, is not in factored form, so we're going to actually have to factor that in order to find the x-intercepts. So remember in the last unit, if I were to plug in for 0 being y, we would get this. And so this is why we look at the opposites of those values. So you don't have to do this, but I just want to show you again where those roots, where those x-intercepts come from. So when you set equal to 0, both x plus 5 would equal 0 and x minus 2 would equal 0. Here's where the opposites come, because in order for x plus 5 to equal 0, that means x would have to be -5. And in order for x minus 2 to equal 0, x would have to equal +2. So that's where those opposite r's come from. So then, again, you do not want to leave your answer as -5 and 2. We want to write them as points. And so it's the x-intercept, so the number -5, then 0, and then also the number 2, 0. For part B, we have, notice that we have that single x there. It's not in parentheses. Just know that whenever you see that single x and you're setting that equal to 0, that means that your first x-intercept is 0, 0. Okay? Because what would happen is you would be setting that factor equal to 0, like we did over here. So -9 times what equals 0? Well, that's just 0. So our first x-intercept is 0, 0. Then the next one might be harder to see. Please do not just say -1. And the reason why you can't do that is because you have a 3 sitting there. So what you would need to do is say 3x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract 1 first, then divide by 3, and you get -1/3. Okay, so we didn't really do any examples like that in this unit, but we did a lot like that last unit. So that is your x-intercept. It's not pretty, but that is the answer. So both 0 and -1/3. All right, for our final example, notice we do not have factored form. But remember in our last unit, we learned how to factor. Math builds on itself. So when you get tests, you're going to notice that you'll have some old material on them. So here's an example of that. So I gave you a hint to first factor out the GCF, then AC factor. So remember, we're setting our y equal to 0. So again, this is like last unit. And then in order to solve for this, we have to factor. So notice that 3, 24, and 36 all have a 3 in common. So the first thing is I'm going to factor out a GCF of 3. So that's going to be x squared minus 8x plus 12. Now, what's inside the parentheses, I can factor by AC method. And since A is 1, I can do the shortcut. So we have 0 equals 3 times. And so remember the AC method. Sorry, I should have done that first. The AC method is A times C, which here would be 12. And then you want to find factors of 12 that will add to get -8. So since you're multiplying to get a positive and adding to make a negative, that means both numbers need to be negative. So I think -2 and -6. So -2 and -6 will make -8, and we'll multiply to get 12. Since this is the shortcut method, we can go straight to x minus 2 times x minus 6. You will not have any factoring harder than that on the test. Now, you have to finish out your answer because you have to equal this 0. So remember, using our factored form, our roots, our x-intercepts, are just the opposites of what I see here. So our roots, our x-intercepts, would be a +2, 0, and a +6, 0. And those are the x-intercepts. All right, so this is questions 1 through 3 on the review. The next video will cover the next section.